area for the source of the explosive. A small helicopter dropped from the sky and edged toward him, hovering about 75 feet above. Venom crouched, preparing to leap away should its pilot decide to fire another rocket, this time in his direction. A hatch slid open in the side of the aircraft.
Come aboard, Mr. Brock. I offer sanctuary and a proposition.
Venom considered it. After a long moment, he lifted his arm.
Yes, I know it's a trap, but what choice do we have? The jury will be here any moment. Besides, this could be enlightening.
A web line zipped from the back of his wrist, arcing up and slapping against the side of the flying machine. He leapt and yanked himself upward, swinging inside to find an interior large enough to hold a dozen men. It was bare bones, however, lowly lit with a run of LEDs along the top of the hold, a single bench built along one side, and a flat-screen monitor on the other. The door to the cockpit was reinforced steel, and no latch was visible. The exterior hatch door stayed open, though the vehicle began to move at high speed. Venom remained standing, his feet clinging to the deck.
Very well, we're here. What do you want?
The screen came on, revealing a sharply appointed man with a trimmed goatee and a haircut so perfect that its cost would feed a family of 10 at a nice restaurant. Arched eyebrows and flinty eyes gave their owner a sinister appearance. Or perhaps it was the goatee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brock. I am Roland Treese. I've decided it would be better to have you with me than against me. Therefore, I'd like to hire you as my new head of security.
Does the position involve your park renovation project?
It does.
Okay, we accept.
At that, the hatch snapped shut, and the helicopter continued on its journey, wherever it might take them. Venom smiled even wider, revealing the entirety of his fangs. After 2 hours in the air, the pilot opened the door to the cockpit, allowing Venom to lean in and see the world as it passed by beneath them. It was a wide expanse of desert with muted colors that blended into one another, tans into browns, into whites, into grays, all intercut with dark streaks and strips that he knew were topographical landmarks, ravines, riverbeds, sinkholes, and even narrow scrub forests.
The Mojave.
If the pilot was unnerved by his hulking figure, even with the saliva, he didn't give any indication. Years earlier, Eddie had done a story on combat helicopters and how they performed in battle. In the process, he had flown with a pilot in a 5-blade Comanche, a state-of-the-art attack craft. He learned the basics of how to operate one, and garnered a crude understanding of how to interpret the gauges on the control dash. The current aircraft was moving incredibly fast. If he read the speedometer correctly and did the proper conversion of knots to miles, they were streaking over the Earth at more than 211 miles per hour. The pilot pointed forward.
That's the place, sir.
A set of low-profile buildings sat in a flat area that looked like a dried salt lake bed. The facility was surrounded by a chain-link fence and boasted a wide, flat concrete pad. The pilot began making adjustments, and the helicopter swooped lower. Within moments, he had dropped the aircraft onto a small helipad. Slipping past, the pilot moved through the hatch and outside, waving for Venom to follow. Sunlight streamed down, and it felt good as it soaked into the inky blackness of his form. Venom stretched, allowing the UV rays to help loosen muscles that had grown tight from being cooped up during the ride. The pilot jerked his thumb toward the closest building.
Mr. Treese said you're to meet him inside the bunker.
After you.
But
We insist.
With a shrug of resignation, the pilot turned toward the building.
hey, come on, I'm just a hired hand. You don't think I'm stupid enough to pull any tricks, do you?
A thick tendril unfurled from Venom's chest, looping around the pilot's neck, hovering there like a noose.
As long as we can squeeze your neck, pop your head off like a clipped flower? No.
The man shuddered visibly, but didn't reply. Double steel hydraulic doors opened as they drew near. Cold air rolled out toward them from the opening, which revealed a polished metal hallway about 15 feet high and the same width. They stepped inside. They were left in semi-darkness. Venom nudged the pilot forward.
We've suffered too much human perfidity to be trusting. In fact, the only reason we came with you was to get close enough to Treese to prevent any further treachery.
A thin vertical strip opened on the wall as the pilot stepped past. Nozzles in the strip shot jets of flame across the hall, cutting through the symbiote tendril in a sizzling flash. Venom stumbled back. As the heat from the flames increased, the symbiote sent out more tendrils that writhed like a nest of snakes. Venom turned to escape, but another strip of metal slid back to reveal another row of nozzles. Before he could move, another wall of fire blocked the entryway. The heat doubled in intensity.
Walls of flame pinning us in! When we get hold of Treese!
Oh, don't blame Roland, dear boy.
A few jets cut off at eye level, creating a thin gap through which Venom could see a man flanked by two soldiers in faceless uniforms, looking similar to the members of the jury. Despite the heat from the flames, the man did not sweat. The flames reflected off of the dark glasses he wore.
This was my idea. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Carlton Drake, director of the Life Foundation. Mr. Treese, one of our board members, suggested that you might be of use in the Foundation's latest venture. Thus, I prepared this warm welcome.
He's a fool!
Venom's tongue whipped like a flail.
Whatever you want. We won't help deceitful scum like you.
Ah, it isn't you we want, dear fellow. It's your children.
Everything hurt. Everything. He hung in a globe of sonic energy, generated by twin apparatus that hung at 45-degree angles above him. Floating in the center of it made him feel as if he'd been dipped in a vat of fire ants. Angry, biting fire ants. The sonic cage was suspended 9 feet above the floor of a high-tech lab in the secret desert base. Advanced equipment surrounded him on all sides. Every wall covered in technology that was beyond his understanding, with more tech scattered on counters around the room. Scientists and technicians moved past quickly, and rarely did they look his way. He didn't care about any of them. His only concern was the grim-faced man wearing the sunglasses and suit, standing below his cage and peering up at him.
You, Carlton Drake! Rah!
Venom lunged forward, as far as the confining sonic energy would allow.
Come closer, so we can suck your lungs out through your nose.
Very colorful, Mr. Brock. Or should I say, venom. Thank you for your offer, but the Life Foundation prefers to keep me intact.
Drake moved closer to the ball of energy and the snarling figure it held.
Indeed, our clients pay handsomely for our goods and services. For the emergency quarters we provide them against the event of world chaos. Made to order survivalism without all of the fuss, so to speak. And they expect to be protected should they enter that sheltered environment. Which is where you come in.
Drake turned and spoke to a man who stood at a control panel.
Proceed.
The man nodded, and his hands moved, making adjustments to the array of dials and knobs and switches. After a moment, he seemed satisfied and tapped a large button on the left side of the panel. The tubular device rose from the floor, aiming at the ball of sonic energy, aiming at Venom.
No! Not again!
A needle-thin beam, the same beam that had appeared 4 times before, crossed the space and pierced the sonic globe, striking Venom in the chest.
Pulling at us!
Man and symbiote thrashed involuntarily, writhing as much as the containment field allowed. Limbs trembled with the enormous effort of trying to get away from the pain. The symbiote's mouth pulled back, toothy jaws wide, revealing the face of the man beneath. Pain was etched there. It felt as if the beam were rooting around inside him, digging in with needle-sharp precision, cutting a part of him away. A thin strand of symbiotic material rode back down the beam toward its source. The agony seemed endless. The symbiote bubbled and rippled on his body. The face they wore went liquid and peeled back in fleshy folds of teeth and gum and loosely flapping tongue. Throughout the process, Drake watched the symbiote and its host without any indication of emotion.
When we heard of the incredibly powerful creature called Carnage, we did some research and discovered that his abilities came from a spawn of the alien symbiote you wear as a costume. That opened us up to fascinating possibilities.
The sample of the symbiote trickled down the beam, moving closer.
We thought that if we could obtain and control other symbiote spawn, we might link them with volunteer security personnel, hand-picked human beings. In doing so, we'd create the perfect guardians for our pampered, well-paying clients.
As the alien substance came near, Drake lifted a petri dish from a nearby countertop.
Our clientele would pay anything to fall under such unsurpassed protection. Based on our examination of your symbiotic half, thank you very much, this is the final seed our scientists have found you to possess.
He placed the petri dish under the beam, tilting it up so that as it passed, the sample spattered onto the dish, writhing as if it had a life of its own.
If one had a taste for the melodramatic, one might call it...
He raised the dish into the air, closer to the captive, who hung suspended and panting as he recovered from the agony of the extraction.
the last son of Venom.
I don't like this.
Trevor Cole paced back and forth on the hospital-grade, wetted floor. The entire room was white. The floor, the walls, the ceiling. Bare furnishings were all brushed stainless steel that took on the glow of its surroundings. There was a table attached to the floor, and 5 chairs sat around it. The table wasn't designed for sitting at, however, not with the grooves that ran along its edges and led to drains in each corner. It was a coroner's table. The room was so bright it made the corners of his eyes ache, the early signs of an ocular migraine. The technician who escorted them there had called it the Pale Room. This seemed appropriate, at least in his mind. Leslie Jesneria banged her annoyance on the steel table.
Oh, sit down. Stomping around here isn't going to make anything happen any faster.
Trevor just turned, pointing at a man who leaned back in his chair, feet up on the grooved table. He had his hands behind his head, showing the dark ink of tattoos that flowed from under his sleeve.
Why do you look so happy about this, Ramon?
Ramon Hernandez didn't change position, other than to raise his eyebrow.
I'm happy as long as they're paying me.
I hate the Pale Room.
It's not so bad. Not as bright as the desert outside of Kandahar, when the sun is right overhead and hating you for living underneath it.
Not even as bright as the Mojave outside of this base.
Donna Diego played with a strand of loose hair. Diego put her elbows on the table.
You've got 3 squares and a cot, soldier, so why are you complaining?
It's the same as being prisoners.
You're not a prisoner.
Cole stopped pacing and pinned Diego with his stare.
You think they'll let me leave? Or you? Or any of us, for that matter?
I don't want to leave. Mr. Drake is doing something here.
You know what that thing is?
Something good. A purpose.
Jesneria, Hernandez, and Karl Mach, who had stayed silent, simply watching as he meditated, all shifted away from Diego and the intensity in her voice.
You can't know that.
Know what?
Mach lifted his hands, palms out.
We're all soldiers.
Not me.
Really?
Really.
Huh. I would have taken you for some kind of Super Joe army in their blood kind of guy.
I never claimed any of that.
Kandahar?
Not with the military.
That's weird. My point remains, we're all soldiers, except for Ramon, and we've all seen things, done things, hard things, maybe even criminal things. Probably even evil things, if we're all honest. Not that that's likely. You can't assume an organization with a secret base rests on the side of the Angels.
Whose side are we on then, Mr. Mach?
The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, all at once. Through the high-definition video monitor, Carlton Drake watched the 5 members of his security team, the 5 survivors, as they reacted to his question, and to the knowledge that he had been listening. 3 of them, Karl Mach, Leslie Gesneria, and Trevor Cole all tensed. He could see their muscles tighten and their spines straighten. All three began scanning the room, looking for any indication of equipment that allowed for two-way communication. They wouldn't find it, though. They were soldiers, highly trained by some of the world's most secretive military units. Black Ops personnel. They would hate that they had been caught by surprise. Both Diego and Hernandez remained relaxed, unaffected by the knowledge of his surveillance. He wasn't surprised at this, especially not from Mr. Hernandez. He'd watched the footage of the man's performance in the desert test. Ramon had destroyed drones and overcome traps with the ease of someone taking a Sunday stroll. Muck sat back, giving up on his search for the monitoring equipment.
You're on your own side, Mr. Drake. Of that, I'm sure.
Very good, Mr. Mark, very good.
Drake pushed a button on the console beneath the monitor.
Time to begin.
A 1-foot square in the center of the table dropped 1/4 of an inch, sliding away to reveal a shallow, recessed area. Inside the hollow sat 5 round discs, petri dishes, laid in a row of 3 and another row of 2. The bottom of the recessed area rose until it was even with the rest of the tabletop. Even in the bright light of the pale room, it was difficult to put a name to what the sealed dishes held. Blobs, blotches, gobbets of ooze, lumps of goop, puddles of slime. All seemed applicable. In one of the dishes, the substance seemed like loose, wiggling gelatin. In another, the stuff had the firmer consistency of chewed bubblegum. A third lay like a shimmering puddle, while the last 2 changed constantly, rolling around the glass dishes, while the last 2 changed constantly, rolling around the glass dishes like quicksilver.
What is this?
This will be the final test.
One by one, cracks began to spiderweb through the glass of each petri dish. Drake watched in fascination. These 5 people were proven survivors, not just in the desert field tests, but in a myriad of challenges and examinations to which they had been subjected since being chosen. Most of the tests have been consensual, from the IQ screening to the DNA deconstruction. Others, such as exposure to certain stressors including gamma rays, cosmic rays, even a sample of Terrigen mist, were performed without consent. The 5 hadn't even known they'd occurred, nor had the people who hadn't survived. This was the hurdle with the greatest number of unknowns. Even the Terrigen test presented more precedents. As for what would happen here, Drake's scientists had no idea. The only other offspring of Venom, Carnage, wasn't really a duplicate of the original. There were similar shared characteristics, but not exact. Carnage and Venom had the same ability to change their biomass, but they employed it in unique ways. Whereas Venom seemed always to opt for larger size and more muscles, the Carnage creature used his ability much more imaginatively to form his limbs into weapons for slaughter. The targeted extraction process had resulted in 5 seemingly different seeds as well. Each of them had taken on a different hue, one becoming a shocking tone of magenta, while another shifted constantly along the red end of the color spectrum, like some sort of liquid sunset. As far as all their instruments could tell, however, all 5 seeds were viable for bonding to a host, and the 5 people in the pale room had the best chance of surviving that process. Drake wondered how many of them would. She refused to move, to stand up out of the chair, even though a part of her brain, a faint voice in the back, screamed at her to get away, to run. But she knew that voice was just panic. Besides, there was nowhere to go. The pale room was sealed. She was sure of it. It would remain so until whatever Drake had set in motion ran its course. Part of Donna trusted him implicitly, even though she had no real reason for it. So she sat, partially in acceptance of her position. Boss? No, that was the wrong word. Leader. The only other person who stayed in his chair was Ramon. She wasn't surprised, even though she knew he didn't possess the same loyalty to Drake. No, she had the impression Ramon would stay in that chair no matter what happened. The other three, Leslie, Trevor, and Carl, had moved to put their backs to the walls, as far as they could from the table. Apparently, they gave in to their inner voices. Her eyes were drawn to the petri dish on the left. The thing inside it lay covering the bottom like a small puddle. Its surface rippled as if a pebble had just been thrown into it. The colors mesmerized her. Red flowing to orange, flowing to yellow. Liquid sunlight. The petri dish farthest from her shattered as the thing inside pushed against the cracked glass. The fluid ran out over the shards, flowing across the table to the edge. There it stopped, roiling up onto itself like a mini tidal wave of goo, and it sat quivering. Thin stalks of it flailed at the air like antennae. After a long moment, it launched itself from the table, shooting across the space.
Ah!
It struck Leslie on the cheek. Immediately, it began to run and spread across her face. She clawed at it, digging in with her fingers, but she couldn't get a grip. The substance lapped over her knuckles and began covering her hand as well. She slid down the wall, coming to rest on the floor. Donna's eyes slid away from her fallen comrade and back to the petri dish with the sunset colors. The dish next to it shattered, the lid exploding into glass dust as the goblet inside bounced out. It hopped across the table, bouncing as if it were made of rubber. In two arcs, it was airborne and sailing toward Carl like a ping-pong ball that had been served. He stepped sideways and swatted at it, trying to knock it away. It struck the palm of his hand and latched on there. Carl tried to shake it off as the goblet sank into his skin. He stared at his hand in horror as the skin began to change color and his fingers grew longer, sharper. He fell beside Leslie, convulsing on the floor. Again, Donna's eyes were drawn back to the sunset liquid. It began to churn under her gaze. The two other remaining dishes fell to pieces. The samples in them began to move, both heading toward Ramon, one slithering like a quicksilver snake, the other rolling like a quivery gelatin ball. As they drew closer, they began to veer into each other, fighting over which got to latch onto him first. The quicksilver snake lashed upward, slapping the gelatin ball and causing it to bounce and roll off to the side. Taking advantage, the quicksilver sample latched onto its target, running up his arm and into his shirt. Ramon's body went stiff, every muscle seeming to contract, causing him to topple backward in the chair as the fluid substance began to spread over him. The other sample changed direction, rolling off the table and out of sight. Donna already lost interest in it, though. She had eyes for the sunset liquid only. She reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching the cracked glass, gently enough not to break it. She didn't look up as Trevor jerked as if gripped by a grand mal seizure before toppling to the ground. No, Donna watched as the thing in the dish lapped upward, churning to touch the glass under her fingertip.
Take me.
It took no effort at all for Donna to push her finger through the weakened glass. She didn't feel the bite as it cut her in two places. Her finger sank into the sunset liquid. She felt its relief in her bones and its need in her marrow. It flowed up her finger, expanding along her skin. Wherever it went, it sank monofilament threads of itself into her, stitching itself to her, bonding with her. She was overwhelmed, overcome, undone. There was pain, then so much exquisite pain. It sang along her nerves, and she felt the symbiote, her symbiote, invade her bloodstream and ride its blind circuit up into the blood-soaked sponge that was her brain. It blossomed in the myelin sheath and sunk roots into her cerebellum.
Home.
Welcome.
The car slid around the corner, rear tires barely missing the curb. The California Highway Patrol car chasing it hung the corner much better and accelerated quicker. The high-performance engine inside helping to close the gap between it and the mid-sized sedan being used as a getaway car by the trio of armed robbers. It had been days, and Spider-Man hadn't been able to locate Brock. It was as if the big guy had disappeared from the face of the earth. The inactivity was driving Spider-Man crazy. This was exactly the sort of thing he needed. Robbie, Ratchet, and Ron had just robbed the 24/7 stop shop at gunpoint. Ron had chosen the sedan so it wouldn't draw attention when he pulled up, giving them a few extra moments to get the jump on the workers at the convenience store. Just a normal grocery getter, not a getaway car for armed robbers. No need to be alarmed. He'd backed into the parking space at 10:38 a.m., right next to the door. Ratchet and Robbie thanked the crew and patrons of the 24/7 stop shop, walked out the door, and climbed into the sedan. And then they were off. Clean. Until they hit the highway. Damn, that was fast. Someone in the store had to have called 911. They had a description of the car since it had been parked directly in front of the two glass doors. And now the trio were off the highway and trying to shake the law from their tails. They were losing ground, too. Ratchet rolled down his window and leaned out, pointing his gun at the highway patrol car.
You want the silver, man? You gotta take some lead with it!
Each shot missed, wildly. Ratchet slid back inside the sedan. A jogger, earbuds in and blasting, didn't look as he went from sidewalk to street. Right in front of the speeding highway patrol car.
A jogger! He's gonna be roadkill!
The officer behind the wheel must have stood on the brakes, twisting the steering wheel hard to the right. The patrol car jerked into a slide, rubber screaming on asphalt, and spewed acrid black smoke. It shuddered to a stop just a foot away from the exercise nut, who had frozen, thinking he was a dead man.
We ought to give that bonehead cut of the tape. Yeah! We're home free!
Something hit the hood heavily enough to make the car bounce on its shocks.
What? Him? Oh, no! It can't be!
Spider-Man crouched on the hood of the sedan, peering in at the trio of petty thugs, even though they were still racing down the road. His hand stuck to the windshield, and he leaned close enough to be heard.
Boo!
Spider-Man leaned back.
Okay, maybe I should leave the spooky stuff to Ghost Rider.
Wrists out, he hit his web shooters, covering the windshield in sticky, gummy web fluid.
Now that's pure Spidey magic.
It slowed them down enough so that they wouldn't hit the tree too hard. He leapt, flipping off of the car and landing nimbly on the sidewalk. An instant later, the vehicle smashed into a thick elm tree on the side of the road. The police arrived and quickly exited their vehicles, and within seconds, the crumpled sedan was swarmed by cops.
Hands up! Don't move!
The web-slinger watched as the officers dragged the trio out of their sedan and put them in cuffs. One of the officers walked up to Spider-Man as his partner put the last robber in the back of the patrol car.
This may be a silly question, especially after what you just did, but are you the real Spider-Man?
Peter Parker smiled under his mask. He didn't know how California police felt about costume vigilantes, but this one seemed to be grateful for his assistance apprehending the bad guys.
Well, I don't have a driver's license to show you, but yep, I'm me.
Wow. We sincerely appreciate the help, sir. If there's anything we can do in return...
Suddenly, Spider-Man noticed that the sun was low in the sky.
Oh, crap.
He had a call to make.
Thanks. Sorry, gotta go.
Sure thing. Thanks again.
The web spinner sat on the roof of a house. Just down the street, a tow truck was removing the sedan. Another large tree loomed overhead, giving him a spot of shade. He needed to call now, or it would be too late in New York and he'd be disturbing her. He lifted the bottom of his mask and hit the contact in his phone.
Hi, Tiger.
Just wanted to touch base and say, I miss you.
I miss you too, hon. When are you coming back to New York?
Soon, I hope. I haven't tracked Venom down yet, but have a new lead.
He hesitated, hating to worry her, but decided to tell her the full story.
Some weird creatures have been seen around here lately. In the description, they sound like symbiotes. Sort of like carnage.
That doesn't sound good.
Tell me about it. One's been attacking public places, confronting the police. Almost like it's been testing itself. Targeting locations where lots of people gather. There's one it hasn't hit. New mall near Salinas. Heading there now, but don't worry. Be home safe and sound in no time.
The lab had emptied of people. All the scientists, the technicians, Carlton Drake, all gone. There wasn't even a guard to watch him. The sonic cage kept him immobilized, impotent.
I know this is frustrating, humiliating for us both.
Venom extended his hand toward the edge of the globe. It was like pushing through solid rubber. The closer his hand got to it, the more pain the symbiote felt, rolling itself back to avoid direct contact, exposing Brock's hand.
The sound wall is solid, strong, but it's even worse for you.
Eddie pushed harder, an inch farther, then another, and the symbiote slapped at his arm in anger and agony.
Trying to force our way through causes you pain so intense that I feel it as well.
Finally, he pulled the hand back, and the tendrils calmed.
I'm almost glad my father and I are estranged.
The symbiote lapped over his hand again, making him whole.
Before we met, I developed my strength to impress him. But even with the addition of your alien power, we're helpless. Father would be ashamed of me. Again.
The symbiote rippled across his face, imparting a thought.
What's that? My own strength. Alone?
To reinforce the idea, the symbiote rolled back from his hand and forearm, revealing the cabled muscles there, strength Eddie had built on his own before their bonding. He'd been a powerlifter long before the symbiote granted him superhuman strength.
Of course. Sonics don't hurt our human half. And that could mean...
His fang-filled smile gleamed wetly in the lab's light.
Yes.
Peter swung wide on the end of his web line, hanging out in midair as he looked down at the wide parking lot of the Northridge Mall, a sprawling building that sat in the center of the lot like...
Well, kind of like a crouching spider.
Spider-Man swooped toward the entrance.
There's the mall. But is it the next target?
As if to answer him, a large object, what looked like one of the freestanding maps all malls have, had come crashing out through the large plate glass window that framed the front of the building over the entrance.
Ah! A clue!
It sailed out into the parking lot in a shower of broken glass, smashing into a Mini Cooper parked in a handicap space. Adjusting his swing, Spider-Man dropped in through the hole left by the mall map. Debris filled the air of the foyer, while mall-goers crowded back by the shops. Every object that had been loose in the big open space was broken, and even items that had been bolted down lay in ruin. It looked as if a bomb had gone off. Spinning toward the sound, Peter saw a woman flying backward over the upper rail, her body twisted in the air, arms and legs flailing uselessly as if she'd been tossed aside like a broken toy. Instantly in motion, Peter calculated her path and leapt to catch her in the middle of her downward arc. Years of web-slinging through a city like New York made his actions intuitive. As she fell into his arms, he aimed for a clear spot on the shattered tile floor, absorbing the impact through his arms and thighs, folding up around her to keep her from being hurt by the landing. Straightening with her still in his arms, he looked down at her shocked face. All around them, people ran, trying to find cover, as the sounds of violence echoed through the hallways.
Be cool, lady. Everything's gonna be fine.
Who are you kidding, dude?
An older man with overly dyed hair and a thick mustache stood with a group of bystanders. He pointed toward the top of the escalators, where the sounds of carnage were loudest.
Even if you really are Spider-Man, you'd never stand a chance against that.
The web-slinger looked up. A female symbiote stood among the rubble on the second level. She was tall and lean, powerfully sculpted. Her face was black and similar to Venom's, her mouth full of wickedly pointed teeth. She had large white eyes and no nose. The rest of her was an ever-shifting pattern of deep reds, the color of drying blood rippling to bright yellow in a free-flowing pattern like hot coals. Flaring behind her was an impossibly long mass of thick hair, most of it vivid yellow, topped by a swath of flame red. The hair moved with a life of its own, waving wildly around her. It was far longer than she was tall, and it held hostages, a man and a woman wrapped tightly in the tresses. Both looked to be in pain, and the man clawed at strands that constricted tightly around his neck. This new enemy grinned widely, showing her sharp teeth.
Well, well, an honest-to-goodness superhero? Perfect.
She began moving forward, her hostages still suspended behind her.
Breaking you in half will make our little exercise a complete success.
Another one. Deja vu all over again.
Venom watched them all. Carlton Drake, the technicians and scientists. He studied them as closely as he could while they worked the controls, doing his best to memorize what each switch, button, or touchscreen accomplished. The guards, faceless in their mirrored helmets. Oh, he watched the guards very carefully. They moved around him, confident and relaxed. He was caged, secure, tucked away. They had him sorted, and had no reason to fear.
Perfect.
I know you've seen this before, Mr. Brock, but I still find it fascinating.
Drake stood on the other side of the room, away from the sonic prison. With his back to the prisoner, Drake studied a large vertical tube filled with a greenish liquid and a portion of the seeds that had been so painfully extracted. The remaining sample was suspended in the center of the liquid. The guards moved, so Drake had a clear view. The move brought one of them close to the sonic cage. Not close enough.
It wasn't easy devising a way to accelerate the maturation of your symbiote seed, yet we prevailed. And the spawn have already been matched with the perfect hosts, the few who survived. In fact, they appeared to choose their hosts consciously. It was fascinating to watch.
A device swung toward the green tube, the tip pulsing with some type of light that bathed the seed. The symbiote globule erupted into a frenzy of swirling tendrils and inky trails. The guard moved a few steps closer.
Our recruits were sent out to test their powers and determine if they will truly make capable protectors. They will confront the police and others of their ilk, and if their success to date is any indication, this sample should be just as...
Drake spun to find one of the guards being assaulted by Venom. Brock's arm, bare of any trace of symbiote, extended through the wall of the sonic sphere, his wide hand locked tight around the guard's throat. Muscles bulged, veins popped along their surface, tendons vibrated with the tension. Everyone else in the room froze.
I don't get it. That cage should hold a normal human.
You idiot. Brock has Olympic-level strength. You left the settings too low.
Though still in pain due to the sonic barrier, the symbiote continued to cover most of Brock's body, lending him its power, enhancing his own considerable strength. Even so, he knew he only had seconds in which to act. The shock of his actions would wear off, and either a technician would increase the intensity of his cage, ending their bid for freedom, or guards would pile into the lab with weapons designed to hurt them, or kill them. He flexed, lifting the guard off the floor, and threw the man into the instrument panel. The guard hit helmet first, and the electronic console crumpled, not designed to withstand a heavy impact.
He slammed Ricardo into the controls. They're shorting out.
The sonic cage flickered, surged once, bathing him in a sheet of prickly pain, then collapsed. Away from pain and confinement, the symbiote engulfed Brock before his feet even touched the ground. In a blink, it began aggressively transforming them, thickening limbs, adding biomass, and swelling to freakish proportions. The fangs multiplied, crowding so much that their jaw distended. Ichor ran green off the hideously red tongue, dripping in great splats on the floor. Talons extended, sharp enough to shred steel.
The monster's free!
Rorschach eyes became jagged, the edges serrated, reflecting their rage.
Indeed. Free, curious, and very, very hungry.
one leap, and he was among the other guards, clamping his taloned hand over the mask of the guard on his left, then shattering the mask of the one on the right with a vicious roundhouse punch. The guard on the right slammed into the ground, shards of his protective shield embedded in his face. Venom curled the fingers of his left hand, talons sinking into the helmet as if it were made of paper mache. One swift yank, and the face shield ripped off. Blood ran along the inside of it, where his claws had slashed the guard who had worn it a second earlier. That man dropped to his knees, holding hands to his face to stop the bleeding. New security personnel tromped into the room, waving guns. Venom tossed the bloody helmet at their feet.
New playmates. Perhaps we'll smash masks first as well. Yes, that should make it easier to decide whose face we want to eat first.
Moving with inhuman speed, the symbiote-covered anti-hero crossed the room, taking down the first guard he encountered with a blow from his fist that shattered plexiglass and slewed the headgear sideways. The guard flipped, feet flying up from the impact as his shoulders were driven back and down. He crashed like a crumpled napkin tossed into a wastebasket. Venom took the next two with a right hook as unstoppable as a wrecking ball. Knuckles drove into the guards' faces, leaving both shields cracked. The first one caved in, its wearer pirouetting in a 360-degree spin before toppling forward in a stiff faceplant against the unforgiving tile. The second one stumbled but kept his feet and his consciousness. Venom's world went white-hot with pain. The symbiote extended off of Brock's body, his spine cranked back, bending into an impossible arch. The psychic pain loop set his brain afire, and all his muscles knotted in on themselves. Crumpling to the floor, he lay on the cold tile and convulsed among the shreds of the symbiote. Carlton Drake walked over, nodding at the guard who held the sonic rifle that had taken down their prisoner.
It pays to properly arm one's employees.
He turned to the technician who stood nearby.
Activate the auxiliary sound cage.
Yes, sir.
And see that the density is at a higher level this time.
Drake looked down at Brock and the shredded symbiote as they lay helpless on the floor.
Though I begin to wonder, now that we have all of the spawn we need, if we really require Mr. Brock to remain alive at all.
Sanctuary, beneath Del Rio Park, San Francisco, California. The shopping cart, heavily laden with scavenged items, rattled as Elizabeth pushed it over the rocky soil. It was dark in the tunnel, but she could see the glow of Sanctuary's gaslit streets just ahead, beyond the tunnel's exit. Timothy walked beside her, carrying a sack of groceries they'd been given at the food bank on Pennsylvania Avenue. They, like all the residents of Sanctuary, would take their findings to the distribution center, where food, clothing, and other supplies were doled out so that all needs were met. Crossing into the light, they exited the tunnel. The dirt became a packed soil road, making the cart easier to push. Elizabeth looked down at her son.
I was hoping we'd see Mr. Brock up above, Mom.
I know, Timothy. It's a shame the council wouldn't allow him to stay at Sanctuary. He was a friend, and we need all the friends we can find.
They turned the corner toward the distribution center. Leaning there, against a wall, was a ragged whip of a man and the stony-faced preacher. Both seemed to have heard her words.
Come on, Elizabeth. You should be using Venom's stories to scare your boy into doing his chores. That psycho's a monster, not some friendly ghost.
You're a fool, Nathaniel. Have you forgotten how Venom protected us all from Roland Treese's diggers? What if they come back? What will we do then? What will you do then?
If they do, my child, God will provide.
I pray that he does, Reverend Rakestraw, because if those mechanical demons do return, prayer will be all we have.
The floor exploded in a shower of broken tile and concrete. Spider-Man barely got out of the way as the golden mass of symbiote hair tried to crush him into paste. The hair recoiled, pulling back toward its hose. The Spider-Man sailed through the air over it, propelled by the proportional strength of a spider.
Doesn't trigger my spider sense any more than Venom or Carnage do.
Flipping in midair, he landed in a crouch behind his female assailant.
But the woman inside is new at this.
He placed his hands on the ground, leaning forward.
And that gives me an edge.
Spider-Man kicked up. His foot connected with the female symbiote's head, flinging her forward to tumble across the room. The symbiote bounced in a kaleidoscopic swirl of red and yellow, banging against the bottom of the escalator. She rolled up into a crouch, shaking her head.
Alien costume helped her take the punch. She's recovering already.
The symbiote's hair whipped around her body, seeming to act independently. It hung down past her heels. When she lashed out, it seemed to grow to more than 30 feet in length. It reminded Peter of Carnage, who used his abilities to fashion weapons with incredible reach. Peter didn't want to wind up tangled in that hair.
Maybe some webs?
He whipped 2 streams of webbing at her as she rose to her feet. The hair whipped around, forming a shield between them. His webbing struck it and was shredded instantly.
Oh, she's fast.
The hair whipped around a thick tree in a heavy round pot. The tree, a 15-foot silver maple, weighed hundreds of pounds, yet the symbiote lifted it out of the pot as if it weighed nothing. She turned to pin him with her eyes and flung the tree.
Real fast!
Spider-Man leapt as quickly as he could, but the limbs of the tree still whipped across his shins. He needed to gain some distance. Hitting the floor, he pushed off again, jumping from the foyer floor to the ceiling far above. He landed upside down and hung there.
Turning tail already? This is going to be easier than I thought.
Just keep thinking that. An experienced fighter wouldn't underestimate her opponent. Eddie wouldn't make that mistake.
The woman crouched, gathering her hair beneath her.
Ah!
She leapt at him from the floor, moving in a liquid-color swirl of living hair and extended claws.
Wouldn't rush me without a plan.
She crossed the midpoint between them, and Spider-Man pushed off the ceiling.
Wouldn't fall into a trap.
He hit her like a cannonball. Gravity was on his side, as was her own momentum. All of the kinetic energy barreled into her as he hit her like a missile. Then he twisted sideways, making a controlled landing on his feet, as if he'd just stepped off a bottom step. The female symbiote didn't fare so well. She smashed into the tile floor amid a cloud of dust and debris, not far from a group of cowering bystanders.
Oh, great.
Spider-Man leapt across the space in a flash as the symbiote peeled back on her raised wrist, positioned near her mouth, revealing a comlink strapped to it.
Strike Agent 4 requesting emergency evacuation!
She couldn't wait for confirmation. Spider-Man was almost on her, so she scanned the area for options. Her new face pulled back in a toothy grin. Through the link with her symbiote, she felt double the exultation.
Now to keep that web slinger off my back.
Her hair rippled outward, growing, stretching, until it lashed around a young man who was recording the fight on his phone.
Hey!
He dropped the device as he was lifted off his feet.
No!
She hefted him into the air, waving him around for a moment before flinging him away like the litter he was.
No!
Toward the glass windows at the mall entrance. The young man closed his eyes, preparing for death.
Go limp, I gotcha!
The teen opened his eyes as 2 strong arms closed around his midsection and something knocked him sideways. The teen's stomach flipped as Spider-Man did a barrel roll and landed, holding him safe and sound. The web spinner let him go. He felt weak, dizzy, but managed to stand on his own 2 feet.
Now, Fur!
Spider-Man turned, scanning the foyer, looking for the symbiote.
Huh? She's gone. But where?
People began to come out of the woodwork, the ones who had stayed, converging toward where he was standing.
I saw her on the stairs, mister.
She's heading for the roof!
Thanks!
He climbed up over the edge of the roof, enveloped in shadow. Not shade, but shadow. Between him and the sun was an aircraft shaped like a flattened rectangle with a set of whirling blades on top. Some sort of hovercraft taking off. The aircraft dipped down in the front and then began moving off over the building, picking up speed as it did. Spider-Man flung his hand out, shooting a long stream of webbing. It arced high through the air and struck the rear of the sleek little aircraft.
Got it!
The hovercraft zoomed up,
Whoa!
lifting Spider-Man off his feet to dangle in its backdraft. As the wind shear became fierce, beating at him as if he were a birthday piñata, he pulled himself up the line.
Or has it got me?
He had no idea where this trip would end.
He fainted again, Mr. Treese.
The room smelled bad. No, the room didn't smell bad. It was an empty concrete box deep in the foundation of Treese International. It smelled of gypsum dust and stale air. Since he actually found comforting, they reminded him of his childhood, of surviving. No, the room didn't smell bad. The man slumped over in the chair smelled bad. Unwashed clothing and body. Sweat, spit, blood, desperation. All that and more mingled and wafted up from him, baked off him in the cone of yellow light shown by the single incandescent bulb that provided the only illumination. The man wasn't underfed. No, he had meat on his bones. At some time before he became homeless, he may have even been in good shape. From his place in the shadows, Treese could see the vestiges of an athletic physique that had gone to seed. Now the man hung in the ropes that lashed him to the chair, his head lolling over his chest, unconscious.
Well, Crane, revive him.
Yes, sir. I'll prepare another injection.
Treese stepped closer to the man in the chair.
He's the first live park dweller we've captured. I have to know what he knows.
What could some hobo know?
Jenkins, do I pay you to ask questions?
No.
Then don't.
Crane stepped back into the circle of light. He was holding a syringe.
There's a fortune in gold beneath that park. But if those scavengers find it, make it public, the city will claim it all. I've got to locate their underground encampment and take them out of the picture.
One way or another. Crane plunged the syringe into the man's neck. The man's head jerked around, his eyes darting, trying to find a way to escape. Roland Treese considered what he was about to do to another human being.
Ah!
The pneumatic lift lowered into the murky hangar bay. Once the fins of the hovercraft cleared the surface, the retracting hydraulic doors began sliding closed. Within moments, the warehouse-like hangar was nearly dark, save for some low ambient lighting. That was a relief. The ride there on the outside of the hovercraft had gotten very hot as it crossed over into the desert. The glare of the sun had been almost painful. Peter felt better, just being cooler. The lift stopped, coming even with the platform. Under his fingertips, Spider-Man felt the skin of the hovercraft vibrate slightly as some machinery inside it began to work. He crawled upward along the still-hot metal, just seconds before the exit hatch opened, and 4 people stepped out. Human people. One man wore a jumpsuit that was similar to a fighter pilot's outfit. 2 others also wore uniforms. They had a more militaristic cut to them and included helmets with full face masks. As a result, Peter couldn't tell whether they were male or female, though they had broad shoulders. The 4th person was a woman. They headed toward an opening that looked to be the entrance to a hallway. The hangar they were in had more openings and doors.
The woman must be the one I fought.
She was tall with long hair, not the length of the symbiote's, but down past the middle of her back. She seemed a good match. She was dressed in a dark t-shirt and jeans. Symbiote formed into civilian clothes. The 4 of them walked into the opening without even scanning their surroundings. He considered following them, but in a hallway, it would be difficult to do so without being seen, and he had no idea where they were going.
I can deal with them later.
Hopping down from the aircraft and springing across the floor in a few rapid leaps and bounds, he closed the space between him and another of the openings. There was no way to discern what kind of equipment they had to provide security. Perhaps cameras or high-tech sensors. He couldn't see anything, but then again, his background was science, not engineering, so he might be staring directly at a scanner and wouldn't necessarily know it. The dim hallway in which he found himself was too narrow to allow him to jump any substantial distance, so he crawled quickly along the wall.
Right now, I gotta get a line on Venom.
He scanned ahead, but found no sign of movement.
Let's see, what's the best way to...
He froze in place, senses on high alert.
Someone coming this way.
Lights embedded in the ceiling snapped on, bathing the entire hallway in soft, clear illumination.
Okay, the direct approach it is.
He moved up to the ceiling, flattening himself to gain as much of the element of surprise as he could. A guard turned the corner, carrying a rifle and wearing a helmet and face mask. The man walked steadily, not noticing the wall crawler lurking above. When he was almost directly below...
Excuse me. Huh?
Spider-Man lowered himself until he was face to face mask with the guard.
I seem to be lost. Could you tell me where the bathroom is?
Just then, a second guard rounded the corner.
What the? Look out!
Spider-Man dropped from the ceiling.
Just what I needed. Enemy reinforcements.
Down the hall, a pair of doors slid open.
And more coming out the elevator.
4 armed guards in face masks pushed their way out.
Who called this meeting? It's not what I asked for.
Pivoting, Peter grabbed a guard, lifted him in his grip, and slung him down the hallway toward the new arrivals. The guy slammed into his fellow guards, knocking 2 of them to the ground. Then Spider-Man reached back and activated his web shooter, spraying webbing over the guard who had his rifle pointed at him. The sticky fluid sealed the gun to the guard's chest, gumming up the trigger, the bolt, and the guard's hands. The 2 who had kept their feet began moving toward him. Behind him, he heard the sounds of new arrivals.
Would have gotten farther if I'd kept a low profile. Gotta remove direct approach from my list of options. Oh well.
One leap, and he was upon them. Swinging fists in a frenzy of action. Helmets and faceplates cracked under his blows as he knocked guards into walls and to the floor. One fellow lashed out with his rifle, the hard plastic stock of the weapon cracking as it struck Spider-Man's hip. Pain flared, but was quickly overwhelmed by the adrenaline that was pumping through the wall crawler's bloodstream. Spider-Man slapped his hand onto the man's arm, latching onto the guard and using him as a pommel horse. The guard's head slammed into the wall as the web slinger spun off him like a gymnast. As quickly as he knocked them down, however, others rejoined the fray. Spider-Man smashed his foot into the faceplate of another defender who had a pistol in her hand.
Where is he?
The kick knocked the woman back, slamming her skull inside the helmet. The guard's trigger finger convulsed, the blasts stitching up the wall. Twisting in midair and lashing out, Spider-Man chopped another guard in the chest with the edge of his hand. The man folded like a piece of cardboard. The wall crawler landed on his feet, pointing at the remaining guards who were still standing.
First one who talks gets to stay conscious.
How annoying.
Using the monitor in the lab, Carlton Drake watched the mayhem Spider-Man was creating among his guards. The sonic prison had been turned up so high that he could feel the sound waves vibrating along the back of his neck.
It appears, Mr. Brock, that you have a champion.
On the screen, Spider-Man lifted a guard over his head and used him as a battering ram to knock 3 more down. They stayed there.
It also seems as if you've just become more trouble than you're worth.
Drake turned to a scientist standing at the console.
Dr. Emerson?
The scientist looked at him, awaiting instructions. From the sonic cage, Venom watched them both.
Instigate the removal procedures.
Emerson nodded sharply, and his hands flew across the console with practiced ease. As he turned dials and adjusted levers, hydraulic arms began to move, swinging around and moving toward the sonic sphere. With nowhere to go, Venom could only wait. Emerson hit a button. Venom shifted back as far as he could in the tiny, painful prison. The equipment slid forward, coming into contact with the sonic cage. The first strings of pain began, thin ribbons of agony that spread across his chest and spooled down his biceps and thighs. The symbiote cried out silently.